Welcome to an emergency episode of the Mini Break Podcast. It is Tuesday, March 22nd. Alex Gruskin here. Breaking news, and we talk about it all the time. This Mini Break, your source for all the biggest storylines, results, and controversies from the tennis world. This counts as all three, folks. It's a storyline. It's a result. It's kind of a controversy as well. World number one, Ashleigh Barty, coming off of an Australian Open title this season, a Wimbledon title last season. She's been number one in the world for the past 3 seasons. Again, 25 years old. She announces her retirement from the game, hanging up the racket, hanging up the shoes at age 25 years old. And of course, you can go to her Instagram to see about a 6.5-minute video that we were playing on loop here before we began this show live on our Cracked Racquets YouTube channel. Of course, we are so grateful for all of you tuning in this late. Again, this is breaking news, certainly, and Barty explained her reasons better than perhaps we could do so here. But look, it's a world number one. She's retiring. Feels like she was just beginning to scratch the surface of her prime. And now we don't get to know what that prime looks like, at least for now. And joining me to help digest, if it's even possible at this stage, all of this information, offer some instant reactions, offer some thoughts, not only on Barty, but of course, big picture where that we now go on the WTA Tour, as a man who joins me whenever we have breaking news, it feels like, from the tennis world. I would point out he joined me for all of the Djokovic action in Australia as well, joining me now. Again, you're our guy when we've got breaking news. It is my friend, tennis channel, tennis.com editorial producer, David Kane. David, that's why I called you co-host when you joined us earlier this week. I knew something like this was down the pipeline. That's a complete lie, but to have you here, obviously you are a former WTA employee as well. You were there for the earliest stages, I suppose, of Ashleigh Barty's ascendance post, I guess her first stepping away from the game earlier. Again, there are so many details to hit. As you all can tell, my brain is a cluster F. I'm not going to swear I would have, but we're live. Hello, David. How are you? How are you feeling?
Alex, I'm only smiling because I'm just so happy to see you, and me, for lack of a better term, seeing the side by side. But it is true. When about 2 or 3 months after I joined the WTA, we started getting in touch with Ash regarding the comeback. I mean, this was, a 2.5-year break from the game, famously to play cricket, and then was working on a comeback in 2016. It didn't really start in earnest until 2017. She won the title in Kuala Lumpur, and the rest, as they say, is WTA history. So it is fascinating to be here on this. And this sort of surprising yet unsurprising development, maybe surprising as to when it happened, but based on all of the signals that Ash has been giving over the years, I did not think a long career was really in the cards for her, but certainly made the most for the time that she spent.
Fair. Again, this is a monumental moment, and we look for Ash Barty, and a lot of you tuning in here on the emergency podcast certainly will already be aware of some of these facts, but perhaps some of our listeners will hear this next morning, were asleep when all this happened, and they're just thinking, can you give me some more context on Barty? I know she won Australia. Well, what else has she done? For Ashleigh Barty, 3-time Grand Slam champion, and perhaps what's most notable, you look over the last 52 weeks, she's 45-6, David. 45-6. She's winning 88% of her matches. This is not someone who's, had a blip or, not a blip, a dip in her level the way, say, Justine Henin did at the start of the season before she announced her retirement. This is someone who is on the ascendant. This is someone who has held serve, over 80% of the time. She's the only women's player in the game to do that. It's a new career high for her. She's breaking serve over 40% of the time. That's a new career high for her. And, we talk about our superficial stats. She's top 15 in break percentage here in 2022 for the first time in her career amongst top 50 WTA players. I mean, let's even go back to the start of the 2019 season. Since January 7th, 2019, which was the first event she played of that year, David, she's 121-24. 121 victories, 24 losses. That is an 83% win percentage. Of course, you look for Ashleigh Barty. She wins her first Grand Slam at that 2019 French Open. She wins Wimbledon last year, 2022 Australian Open. Of course, it's notable that she did not play at all during the post-pandemic in 2020. She missed that French Open. She missed that US Open. And yet with all the success she has had, not only at the Slam level, the 1000 level events, whenever Ashleigh Barty plays, she's in contention for the title of late. And obviously you even go prior to that, the doubles success that she's had in her career, 2018 US Open doubles champion, finalist at each of the 3 other slams as well. I think when we look at Ashleigh Barty's career, and it's funny, we're picking up our conversation where we left off Monday, there's no doubt she's a Hall of Famer. Like, even on just this resume, I think you pretty clearly would put her in already, because I think when you talk about this era of, for me, the Hall of Fame is, if we're talking about an era of tennis and we have to bring up your name, in my opinion, you belong in the Hall of Fame. When we're talking about this era of tennis, 20 post immediate end and post Serena, one of the names you will always talk about is Ashleigh Barty. I guess let's start here. Like, is she a Hall of Famer with the career she's already put together?
Yes. I mean, I would say to the extent that the Hall of Fame can be assured anyone, I would say she really locked up the requirements last summer when she won Wimbledon. At that point, she has won majors in singles. She's won majors in doubles. She backed up her, sort of surprising run to the 2019 Roland Garros title. I'm sure in her wildest dreams, when she pictured herself hoisting her first Grand Slam trophy, I don't think she would have pictured it be in Paris on the clay. And the fact that she was able to come full circle 2 years later and do as well as she did at Wimbledon really, I think, locked it up in the minds of many that she was, the best player of this sort of post-Serena era, the sort of interregnum period. And the question I think we were starting to ask was whether this was an interregnum or whether this was the start of a new Ash Barty themed era. And certainly after Australia, it seemed like we were leaning towards this was the era of Ash Barty, just because of how far ahead she appeared to be of everybody else in the top 10. She was far and away the most consistent, just completely impenetrable on serve, off the ground. The questions were all framed in terms of what can be done to compete with Ash Barty, much less beat her. And that's what's a little bit disappointing about this news happening right now, is that I do think in the last couple of weeks, we've started to see sort of I think I used the word coagulation in the podcast of these sort of this group A who could potentially be battling it out with Barty for the big titles. And again, while I did think that, this was probably coming, based on the news that she'd been engaged, things like, quotes like Craig Tyser saying that he didn't picture her ever winning the US Open, which seemed like a big hint that maybe she wouldn't be playing the US Open again. I mean, but I did think that she would want to be back in Paris and Wimbledon to defend.
I apologize for interrupting you, but that's the other big question. That's what should have been the lead. Is this a surprise? Because we've seen, as you mentioned already, Ashleigh Barty has stepped away from the game before, and she was a highly touted junior who stepped away, A, to explore that rugby career, but B, because I think she's been pretty open about it. I think she enjoys being a professional athlete. I think she enjoys the spoils that come with being very good at your sport. I don't know that she loves tennis. I don't know that she eats, lives, breathes, sleeps tennis. I think she is a professional and she gets her training in. I'm not to say that there's anything she does that she gives less of an effort than any other player. In fact, one of the hardest workers, look at the physicality she brings, match in, match out. But I don't think she loves being a tennis player. Like so again, it's always difficult to judge those things.
And to interrupt you, I mean, I think when we say professional tennis player, that's a very loaded term. That doesn't just mean going onto the court and playing your match. That means traveling 10 months out of the year. That means going to press conferences. That means,
and
if
you
you're world number one,
10 months of the year of travel. That was always something she was never a fan of.
And oddly, I think it's not a coincidence that she's had her most successful period of her career at a time when she was afforded the forgivable opportunity to stay home for large swaths out of the year. I mean, notoriously, she didn't play after the lockdown in 2020. She skipped, big chunks of 2021 and was not on the boards for Indian Wells in Miami. I mean, this was someone who really prioritized, for better, for worse for fans, better for herself and her mental health and her well-being, prioritize being at home with her friends and family. And she was a player who for the last 3 years has been able to have the best of both worlds and has really reaped the rewards of it, has in many ways achieved all of the top line items of a career. And, even to think, is a comeback on the cards? I would posit the question back to that person. For what? This is someone who's really achieved all of her wildest dreams, has been number one, has won multiple slams, has an Olympic medal. I mean, this is somebody who has no glaring holes in her resume, an assured Hall of Famer by any metric. And so, in many ways, looking at her and looking at how she views the world, it's not a surprise that she chose to make 2022 her last season. What's surprising to me is that perhaps it had happened now. I did think that she'd want to come back and defend her Wimbledon title. It seemed like something that was, particularly emotional for her, a big opportunity to be back on center court. She's now the second player in a row to not be back to defend her Wimbledon title after Simona Halep missed it last year as well. So maybe, I guess, Simona will get the nod on the schedule on, I think it's day 2. They let the defending champion on center.
First of all, it'll be Raducanu. You can just lock that in.
Just Raducanu all day on the schedule. Even when she's not on, she'll just be hitting balls into the crowd. But yeah, I think this is someone who has really, personified work-life balance over the years. And I think she is finally at a point in her life where she wants to choose life over all the work that comes into being a pro tennis player. She's someone who I think will find happiness at home. She's about to get married. I think there's a lot awaiting for her in this next chapter in the short term. And I think that's probably why, in the sort of the afterglow of winning Australia, she's made this decision to pull the ripcord on what has been, a scintillating career.
Yeah. And, again, I'll have super producer Daniel Westoff will play the full clip at the end of this show. And maybe we'll have that full Instagram clip as well on the podcast as well. It's like 6.5 minutes from Ashleighs Barty. Again, her being interviewed and explaining her decision to do this. Now, I will be honest with all of you watching live, all of you podcast listeners, again, as we look on the screen, I do apologize. There's an H missing in Ashleighs Barty's name. Obviously, super producer Daniel Westoff, I bring up the fact that we were mid college tennis recap when this news broke. So again, we are doing this as live can
Ashleighs.
be. Yeah, which that's just how you say it in slang. But I do apologize for that fact. Paul Lemon in the comments goes, this news is beyond shocking. That was our reaction as well. This news was certainly beyond shocking for us during that podcast. We did like a little 5 minutes on, wait, is it time to just sneak in 5 minutes on Barty here because of the success that she's had? Sorry, go ahead.
And for it to even happen today, the day before the Miami Open,
right before Miami begins, like it's just surprising.
There is a pretty barren week in the schedule, like leading up to Billie Jean King Cup, that if you were looking to make it sort of the news, it's in many ways, it is sort of, it's very on brand for Ash Barty. She doesn't really want to be the number one news story. She wanted to drop this news when she wanted to drop it. And, the tennis world literally is going to go on without her tomorrow. And it's a fascinating development. I think, Ash Barty stays winning, for better or for worse.
Sure. And it's fair. Fascinating, surprising. Do we see a second act? That's something I want to ask you as well. But before we move on to how this impacts the tour, and obviously she wasn't going to be in Miami, but even just the psychological effect of knowing, hey, the race for number one is now freaking on. You look in tennis's history and looking for some historic parallels. And I came up with a short list of names over the past, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever, between finding out the news and the starting of recording of this podcast. Some of the names that jumped out to me right away. I think the first big one was Bjorn Borg, who things were a little bit different. And, some would argue that McEnroe had caught him by that point, and it looked like
Alex, it's really way too late at night for you to start comparing Ash Barty to Bjorn Borg, but go on.
You don't like that one? Yeah, you like that one?
Bjorn Borg has how many French Open titles in a row?
Yeah, fair, but again, similar in age, two people who were clearly at the top, if not the very top of the game when things ended, and people who still had more slam titles left in them, right? Like, I think we all agree, even if Bjorn Borg wasn't going to win 9 consecutive French Opens, he was probably going to win at least 2 more. Like, you imagine he sneaks one out 27 and then maybe 29 or 30. Like, that would be part one. Part two, some of the other names again. And in retiring as she was number one in the world, that felt a little bit different because it felt like there were more names challenging her at the top of the game at the time. You probably remember this better than I do, but B, again, Barty's best tennis, in my opinion, was still ahead of her. Like, I do feel like maybe this is her best tennis, but she had more of it left in her. Yeah. I think we had already seen Ennen's best tennis when she retired. Now, that's not to say she wasn't still very good at the time she did retire, but like, that's the other one I would point to. And Paul Lemon in the chat points out Ennen's the only other player to retire as the world number one. I appreciate that little tidbit from him. You start to look at some of the other ones. Someone brought up Sampras to me in one of our private text conversations. Sampras was broken down. Like, the eyebrows looked excellent. The knees, a little less so. And so, like, I'm not sure that that's a fair comp there. Another one to me, And this is obviously such drastically different circumstances. I got two more for you, I promise.
Okay.
Drastically different circumstances, but I don't think completely. Like Monica Seles was not even close to the top of her game. But she was certainly on the rise, and obviously so different the circumstances, right? But to have her removed from the game suddenly and surprisingly while she's at the peak of her powers, again, it's not a direct comparison because Monica Seles ate, breath, sleep, everything tennis.
Yeah, and Monica loved tennis, and Monica loved every part of the tennis world.
Exactly.
Being a tennis
she
star.
wanted to be a tennis player, not a pro
athlete. This is the most emotional I'm getting thinking about Monica Seles during this Ash Barty retirement podcast.
Yeah, to do that to you at 11:30, that's just rude of me. I apologize.
I got to hear the last one before I go in.
And then the last one is like, and she came back, and it was due to pregnancy, and it's so different. But like Kim Clijsters, sort of when she retired or stepped away from the game the first time, like kind of to me. Those were the only ones that jumped out. Do any of them seem like good fits to you?
Well, I mean, you're thinking of like players who made, I guess, surprising retirement announcements or were suddenly taken out of the game. For
Joakim Johansson.
Pim. The person who narratively has always been the most similar to me before Ash Barty would be, peak Martina Hingis in the late 90s. This was someone who was far and away the best player in the game in the late 90s, between 97 and 99, was significantly, smarter, clutch, had some physical limitations, wasn't the tallest player, wasn't necessarily the most powerful player, but just really maximized her game at a time when.
Add to that, Hingis, you look at all the records for people before the age of 22, 23 years old. Seles is on a tier by herself, and it's not particularly close. The thing is, Hingis is on a tier after her, on her own, by herself, and it laps Serena, it laps Sharapova, it laps Enin, it laps Venus, anyone you think of. That's how good Hingis was her first 5 years on tour.
Yeah, but was at the same time competing against underdeveloped talent who were coming up right behind her. Your Venus, Serena, Lindsay, Jennifer Capriati coming back from her, from her trials and tribulations. I mean, there was a lot of players who were just not at the peak of their powers and really became into their own at the start of the 2000s. The Belgians, Kim and Justine. Yep. It just really, the power creep overtook her in such a massive way. And so that was what had always been my struggle with Barty. You talk about her best tennis being ahead of her, or how much of her best tennis was ahead of her. I wondered how much or for how long she would either want to or be able to compete with those behind her as they started to get their collective acts together. I mean, to your point, I don't think we're getting close, but I don't think that's really in danger of happening in the next 2 months. If she had played Wimbledon, I would have put her as my number one favorite to win Wimbledon. I would have even, depending on how the clay court seasons shook out, made her my number one or number two pick to win Roland Garros. So I think there was certainly a lot ahead of her, at least this year. But I think this is someone who has, is competing at a time that it's the weirdest time in tennis history. And that's a lot to do with what's happening in the world right now. So I think there is that conversation to be had. At the same time, just like Hingis, I would never fault Ash for maxing out on that to the fullest extent of her abilities. I mean, I think that's part of maybe what drove the decision to retire. I mean, how can you top winning your home slam as emphatically, decisively as she did, to be the world number one in your home country? Everyone tunes in to watch you. I mean,
yeah, what was it?
It's an Olympic moment.
Or something crazy, like 14 million tune in.
Yeah, something like 25% of the country tuned in, or maybe something even more, which I thought was funny when people were talking about those numbers, because we'll all be asleep the other 9 months of the year. But yes, I'm glad they all got up to watch Ash beat Danielle Collins in the final. But I mean, it was a magical Olympic moment, and for somebody who has looked to, I think, do as much as she could without having to really make a lot of sacrifices. And I think also, geographically, she was always going to be at a disadvantage because she's a homebody from Australia. I mean, if you're a homebody from Bradenton, it's real easy to, come home and train and kind of be in your bubble. But when you're coming from Australia, in the best of times, it's difficult. And that's not even factoring in, travel restrictions. We saw Darren Cahill have really some big issues with having to, do those 2-week quarantines on both ends. I mean, this has been some brutal stuff mentally on someone who is already not crazy about the grueling life on tour. So, I mean, I think this seems like the best decision for her. Could she have made the decision in 6 months, and be one Wimbledon title richer? Maybe. But I mean, I think for her, I think she's hedging her bets and she is going in on top like Sampras. That is where I see the Sampras comparison. That's probably the closest where I could see, and maybe even Flavia Pennetta is someone who won the US Open and said, I'm done. It would have been surprising if she had, maybe I probably would have been less surprised if she made the announcement on court on Rod Laver Arena that listen, I'm out. This is the best way I want to step away from the game. But she's always been about doing things differently.
You have broken my brain, and I was debating whether to sneak in an extra 30 minutes on the bike here tonight. And I was like, nah, I'm tired. We've done this extra bonus pod. You've done your hard work. You deserve to go to bed. I will be spending 30 minutes tonight comparing Hingis to Barty. You have broken my brain for the second consecutive podcast. I am so jealous of that. I'm so jealous of that take. I'm so angry with myself.
I got a Hingis poster in my bedroom.
Yeah, I'm just again, it's the good sort of competition between us in terms of that take. I am so jealous. I'm like, Alex, be better. That's a take you should have had at the tip of your tongue. See, I like the Borg one because of the age and just how good they are relative to the field right now.
But it's
also but what was left on the table? I apologize. It's US Open this year. So again, it's the two low hanging fruits that I just feel and this maybe tells you my passion for the game. If I was Ashleigh Barty, which you can't do those sorts of exercises because you say, well, if I'm Ashleigh Barty now, and you don't take the previous 25 years of baggage that come with being Ashleigh Barty in assessing this one decision, but you're I get to defend my Wimbledon title on center court, which, sorry, everyone else, it is the most prestigious title in tennis. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I can go for the career Grand Slam in New York, where I will be the favorite. And again, I lose to Shelby Rogers last year. I would like to make amends for that one. That's the one slam I've got left on the table. Then I've bet on the career slam. Then I've done it all. Maybe I can pop in 3 years for an Olympics because it's not that far removed. And I can just be yeah, you know what? I'm going to give it one more go. That's the other thing is do we see Barty in 2 to 3 years? I'm curious your thoughts on that. If she's at 28 years old, would be you know what? I think I do still have 2 to 3 years left in me, because certainly from a physical standpoint, we would argue she does right now. But that's the thing. It's so again, with that eye on the return, it's just there are a few things left that I think could be motivating enough to bring anyone back on the court.
And we certainly saw a rash of players making comebacks, and I think that has started to peter off.
The Clijsters comeback is still happening.
Well, I think that's the Clijsters comeback may be part of why we're not seeing as many comebacks. I mean, it certainly is not, it's not one of those things where, look, she could do it. Everybody's doing it. I think to be fair, yes, she's still very young. I think that is the main reason why you would potentially argue for an Ash Barty comeback. But I think looking at the overall narrative and arc and story of her career, hers has been one of, how much do I really want to do this? And I think she did come back because she felt she had something to say as a tennis player. And she certainly said a lot in the last couple of years. And so I don't know if, she seems like the kind of person who, once she's made these decisions, having said that, she made the decision to step away and then made the decision to step back. So she could change, a lady can change her mind. But all that said, I feel depending on how life shakes out for her, I think she's someone who can find happiness off court. I think, you look at even a Casey Dellacqua. I mean, she's got some really good role models for people who have, made the transition off tour and have become, this is someone who could, I was just talking to Phil Fama about this with another player. I mean, this is someone who could potentially, transition into a media career. This is someone who could be a coach, what is Ash Barty passionate about? And I think that's what we're really going to find out in the next couple of months and years, because but to your point, I don't know if she was necessarily passionate about all that comes with being a professional tennis player. And so it'll be interesting to see what she decides to do from here on out. She's certainly young, talented, rich. The sky is really the limit for her. She can invest in a startup and make a lot of money. I mean, there's really, everything is on the table for her. But I think in terms of her career, there's nothing on her resume where I would think she's dying to come back to do this one X particular thing. Whereas I think other players, perhaps, even go back to Hingis. I think Hingis really did feel like she was still in the prime and maybe wanted to win that one more slam to prove that she could compete with that generation of players. But I don't know if that's the same situation for Barty.
Couple of things off of that. Ashleigh Barty, I need you one Thursday a month on a daily show called the Mini Break Podcast. One Thursday a month. That's all I'm asking for. You can even do it bi-monthly. Try monthly. Once a year.
It's on the WTA contract when you retire that you have to be a crack rackets.
Exactly. Come on. We got
freelancer.
Room for you. You talk about the wealth aspect. That's the other thing. She's definitely extraordinary. Again, she'll be comfortable for the rest of her life. Is she passing up generational wealth? Like, is she going to miss out on anything? Or has she become famous enough in her circle and where she was going to be to where those lucrative, deals will still be available for her?
Oh, I would say, just to our point about the TV ratings, I would imagine she is something of a national hero now. And I think
this is such typecasting, whatever the Vegemite cereal equivalent is. Maybe it's just straight up Lucky Charms in Australia. Like wine, or, again, the Kellogg's equivalent, just put her face on that box, right? Like that already happens.
If McEnroe is as American as apple pie, Barty is as Aussie as Vegemite. I think that's part of why I'm like mentally bumping on the Borg comparison, because I think Borg was so iconic. And I think that's the one thing about Ash Barty, who maximized her career. I don't know if she is that sort of, world shaking, unforgettable champion in the way that a Bjorn Borg was. And that's a steep order to, and obviously Borg has the advantage of being, one of the first big stars to ever play the game, I think. But I think that's also sort of the charm of Ash Barty. She was that workman-like player who she loved to work. She liked to compete. And I think she did both of those things very well, as long as she decided to do it. And I think that's also part of maybe why she made the decision when she did. I think you do, in order to enjoy those two things specifically, you have to be 1,000% invested. And I think the moment you decide your heart's not as in it, the same thing potentially happened to Henin in 2008. Once you started to take your foot off the gas just a little bit, she started taking those losses in Australia, in I think Indian Wells and Miami. And then it was just suddenly the love was no longer there, because then you weren't in it 100%. That is something that Henin actually told me when she got inducted into the Hall of Fame, to make this a full circle conversation. She felt that players of a certain stature like her could do everything that a taller player could do, but in a shorter period of time, that the career is inherently shorter because you don't have those physical gifts.
Yeah, exactly. You just have less of the margin for error. It's a little harder to win points freely, right? Like that Rybakina serve is going to be there forever. That Sabalenka serve, just kidding. But no, I completely see that point. I'm hoping God willing, this pandemic slows down and slowly we return to normalcy and all these different things. Instead of calling it the COVID era, let's just call it the Barty era. Like this 3-year run was the 3-year Barty run. And I do think, and again, during the heart of that 2020 summer when there was no tennis going on, I went back and looked at some of the best 3-year runs, some of the best 5-year runs in tennis history. That's why I'm so angry I missed on the Hengist comparison. Barty's not in the Celis tier. She's not in the Graf tier. She's not in the Serena tier, that Navratilova tier, that elite of the elite. But if you stack her best 3 years, honestly, the problem is it's really a 2-year run. Like you have 2019, 2021, and then the start of 2022. It's not the biggest sample size, but if you stack in, and I mentioned it, 121 and 24, right? Or whatever it is since the start of 2019, that 2-year run will hold up pretty well against just about anyone. Like it's not tier 1 all-timer. You're at the top of the Hall of Fame pyramid, but like, you know what? Jeff Sackman, you're doing the tennis 128. I am fascinated to see A, if Ashleigh Barty ends up in the top 128 players of all time, and B, how high he'll have her go, because it was a really efficient prime for Ashleigh Barty.
This is the COVID era. If you ask me in 10 years what I'll remember about this time, it'll be the fact that I wasn't able to go outside for large swaths of it. So no, it's definitively the COVID era. I think even Ash Barty, I think, would define this as the COVID era. So much of her time was spent not on tour because of COVID. So I think, listen, again, maxed out her potential 1,000%. And I think that that can only be lauded. And I think it goes to show it, anybody who really puts that hard work and really, has that natural, anyone with a little bit of natural talent, you put that to hard work, and you have a good team around you, and you're in that good headspace, you could take advantage, and anything can happen to you. So I think that goes to show that goes for everybody on tour right now. I think Ash Barty is such an example, an inspiration that, the sky is really the limit, because I think when you looked at Ash Barty, in 2014, bombing out in qualies, as like a seemingly a washed up junior, I think she would even describe herself as that like that at the time. It was, who could have imagined that she would come back, the fully formed person that she is today, and the one who's making the calm, confident, mature decision to step away because she feels that, she wants to do something else, and that there's nothing, it can't falter for that.
Yeah, and again, you can see her full explanation on her Instagram video. It's like a 6.5 on Instagram. It's a 6.5 minute video. She tries to get into every detail. I would highly recommend it to all of you who tuned into our live show here now. Final topic for you, and then I'll let you go. As we look at this, I mean, obviously nothing changes in Miami because Ashleigh Barty was never in the draw. But as we look towards the clay court season, and on Monday, so literally less than 36 hours or 48 hours ago, David, we had this conversation of, feels like we finally have sort of a pecking order forming. Barty, you're clear-cut number one. Swiatek, you're clear-cut number two. And then after that, it's the rat race to try and figure out, on any given week, there's 3 to 45 players who can be in the running for a tournament title. Well, we just lost our number one. And, she wasn't at every event. So we've been in this WTA parity era, of course, for the past couple of seasons. Swiatek, the door opens that much more for her, certainly, to take the tour by the rein, take the reins of the tour. At the same time, this retirement prolongs that parity, right? For like at least another season. You felt like we finally maybe had a sign of calmness and stability emerging. Now it's like, again, is Osaka still your favorite on hard courts? Well, Barty's not in it, so tell me why it shouldn't be her. Or like, is it Swiatek now? Or is it Kontaveit or Sakari or the notorious PBG or just, any of the players peaking at the right time? Where I think that's what this does, is I think it extends that era of parity.
I mean, as someone who has never necessarily enjoyed times in tennis where there is one person significantly ahead of the pack, okay, I think it does kind of refocus the narrative where now, for better or for worse, it's kind of an even playing field right now. I mean, whether that's for good or for bad, because I've been kind of critical about sort of the top 10 being the sort of, amorphous mush. But at the same time, it's weird also because Barty played so infrequently that it's not like you can't be like, oh, we just saw her last week. It's going to be crazy. I mean, like the fact that the world number one and world number two as of last week were not in Indian Wells, and it was a very normal tournament. Like, I think if Serena had been number one at the time and missed Indian Wells, you would feel her absence and you'd be like, well, the draw shook out the way it did in part because Serena was not there. I don't know if you can look at the Iga Maria final and think, wow, if Barty was there, for sure things would be different. I mean, I think it would have been somewhat the same. Maybe Barty would have been in the final, maybe she wouldn't have, but I don't think you can say definitively, based on the way Iga played and certainly the way Maria played in the semifinals, that was a sure bet that Barty would have dominated the field in Indian Wells had she been there. So I think, this is not that there's ever a good time for a world number one to retire, but at least it's happening on the heels of Iga, Maria, Paula, Annette, Simona, all kind of posting impressive results that make you feel like these are players who can really put together, and they're all solid clay court players. So it's like, if they, it's not like they're about to head off a cliff because they're hard court specialists. And, there's still a lot of intrigue with whether Naomi can get back, whether Bianca, whether Sophia Kenin, who I think just withdrew from Miami, what will happen with her. I mean, I was just talking to Phil this morning that, when you looked at the end of 2019, early 2020, you had Barty, Kenin, Andreescu, Osaka. This should have been this top four all competing for slams. And I said 3 of the 4 were not even competing right now. And now it's all 4 of them are like kind of falling off a cliff. But I think with that said, I think, it's at least we're coming off of a really strong Indian Wells. And I, for one, I'm kind of excited to see how the tour shakes out. It'll be interesting to see how Iga really has to shift mindsets from being someone who was chasing number one to just suddenly being number one. If that's even what happens, Barty has the option to remove her name from the rankings or not. I don't think we got confirmation of whether that will happen immediately. That could be a few more weeks on Barty's weeks at number one total that you can reference in a couple of years when you're running the numbers. But I think it's wild news. I'm happy for Ash, and I think I'm excited to see how the tour moves on, or how the tour continues to take shape.
Yeah, a couple of things off of that. Whenever you start out a sentence with "I don't like," I laughed because I was like, "Oh, I want to know where this is going next." I'm very excited for that. The other element I would add is a lot of these players, particularly the young ones, like Iga's played fewer, I believe, than 10 matches in her career on grass courts. And as you just go up and down the list, right? Like Goff has as many matches under her belt, it feels like, as anyone out there. And like, we don't really know what Fernandez looks like on grass. We saw Raducanu a bit last year, but we don't really know Clara Tauson, what she's going to look like on the Wimbledon grass courts. Even the top flight players like the Socceries, the PBGs, who's barely played any grass court matches, and Kontaveit's of the world, Sabalenka's of the world. Like, can you make a case Sabalenka's the favorite now, or Pliskova's the favorite now to win Wimbledon? Like, Ashleigh Barty, more than anything else, was going to be your unequivocal favorite at Wimbledon for the next half decade, at least. And now I have like, you'll have to talk me out of picking against Ostapenko if she's playing this well at Wimbledon, or like something, or like a Bencic title at Wimbledon as well, or like just something weird. Samsonova just goes on like a second week tear or makes the quarterfinals or something. I know nothing. Like, I think this would apply to the men's side too, just because outside of Djokovic and Nadal, like, what is Zverev on or Medvedev or Tsitsipas or any of these guys on grass courts? I think the pandemic has impacted our perception of grass court tennis perhaps more than anything else, because that was the season most impacted. They canceled Wimbledon. I have no idea what's going to unfold during the month of grass court tennis on the WTA Tour.
I mean, it's interesting because I've never been one to think about Wimbledon before Wimbledon. Really, I think I really do look at the grass court swing and who's been playing well.
It's an aberration. It's like a 1 month sprint.
It's like probably the most impossible slam for me personally to predict. That's why Barty would be an easy pick in March to be like, who do you think is going to win Wimbledon? Well, like, it's Barty or it's Svetlana Perankova if she comes back. I mean, like, but is that the best part of the Barty retirement news? Is that now I can start picking Ostapenko to win every week and be not completely unreasonable? I'll take it.
If that's the spin zone, it's not an unreasonable spin. Again, we're in the flip a coin era or pick a name out of a hat era.
Rolling the dice.
Yeah, exactly. I like naming the hat better because you can put all the 64 names or whatever, 128 names in the main draw of a Grand Slam. And yeah, maybe you can filter out a few of them. Like, I love you, Teresa Martinsova. I think the window's probably closed on her winning a Grand Slam, but like,
is she out of the GOAT race officially, Teresa Martinsova?
It's been closed. Great tattoos. Big fan of those. But yeah, out of the GOAT race just for now. Greatest of all time to consistently play in leggings? Like, maybe. I don't know. It depends how specific you want to get with your GOATs. Yeah, I have no idea. That's to me from a tennis aspect, because I think the clay court season, to your point, was already open. And I think on the right week, there's still going to be some people who could beat Barty on a hard court, particularly that late in the year in New York. Australia is a different monster. Wimbledon is the one where I just would have picked Barty and slept easy at night. Now I no clue.
Yeah, I mean, Wimbledon with a bullet. I don't know necessarily if Australia would be the one Australia and US Open felt like a bit of a toss up for me because of all the sort of seemingly, but the
Barty
mental
Sturm she was 1A heading into those events, right? And it's like, maybe you've got 1B, but in 1C.
Yeah, she was the number one favorite to win this year's Australian Open for sure. And then, the draw happened, and then obviously helped her, over the finish. I don't know if she'll get 4 straight Americans again to win another slam. Maybe that was in the decision-making process as well. But certainly, Wimbledon, number one. And then obviously, as a former French Open champion, you can't rule her out of that. But that's the one thing I kind of feel a bit robbed of, is it would have been interesting to see this sort of encroaching, if not completely, evenly playing field situation. Kind of, we were looking for that Barty Swiatek match. That's what we were previewing, on Monday. I think we were looking to see whether that could happen in Madrid or Rome and how that would tee up the potential Roland Garros face off. But I do like the fact that you were hyping names in a hat and did not take the opportunity to sell your merch. I feel like that was sort of a missed opportunity for our live studio audience right here.
Well, first of all, I would never take off my hat in front of a live audience, not ever. But B, last question for you, and then I'm letting you go because we are going to finish before midnight and under an hour, by the way. This is a personal record for us. Shout out. It's not going to happen. There are no reports of it happening. It's not going to happen immediately.
Okay.
But 2022 rolls around. Ashleigh Barty says, I would like to get back in the tennis world, not as a player, but as a coach.
You mean 2023?
2020. Is it 2022?
right now it's 2022. So I'm guessing you mean next year is 2023.
Yeah, it's 2023. Thank you. And she's like, I'd like to get back in the game as a coach, not as a player, as a coach. You get to pick one player for her to coach. Who do you want it to be?
Who do I want her to? I mean, first of all, you'd have to imagine a scenario where she's like, I don't know if you ever watched Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide, but she'd have to be like that robot teacher where like she's sort of just rolling around and like you kind of just see her face in the stands on a screen. Who would I want to coach her? I mean, sentimentally, I guess I would say Daria Seville right now. I feel like that would be a cool pairing. You know, they were always, I think they're sort of like similar spiritual sisters. I think that would be interesting. Who would I want? I mean, I would love for her to teach Arina Sabalenka how to serve. I mean, that would be pretty cool if she can, you know, if Mark Philippoussis brought her halfway there, I think maybe Ash Barty could take her over the finish line and, you know, kind of really just get that snap and give her a good kick on the second serve so she doesn't feel so out of ideas when the first serve doesn't go in. I mean, she's such a specific temperament that I don't know. I can almost see her coaching an ATP player before I could see her coaching a WTA player. I won't do the accent, but I could imagine her being like, I don't know if I can deal with the sort of the theatrics of a I mean, I think she's getting out of the WTA tour for a reason. So I don't know if she wants to necessarily get back into the thick of things. If I could pick an ATP player, I don't know. I would love to see her work with Steph Tsitsipas for the lulz, but I don't know if I can really genuinely pick anybody.
That's a really good one for the backhand slice return, if nothing else. And that's actually a great choice. Yeah, it could be men's or women's player. I don't think I specified. I would very much like that. Damn.
I don't know if she could deal with his BS, but I think.
Yeah. First of all, what if she goes, the hair's got to go? She's like, this just isn't going to work. I need a shaved head, crew cut. I need you. Yeah, I need you locked in, Stefanos.
More inspirational quotes. I feel like she would hate those.
I think Ned Bigby and Jennifer Mosley might have been the first couple I was like, you two need to get together.
They're your OTP.
Yeah, I mean, that's because it was 04-ish, 05, 06, from like 9 to 11. That's like onset of puberty. Yeah, like it's like, let's get going.
We were the target age group for that show.
Yeah, that's what I'm like, you're talking my language now. I was like, Amanda's show was a little bit before my time, but once it spun off to Drake and Josh, now we're, all right, now we're talking. And I always tell college players now when I'm joking around with them, so here's the difference between you and me. I watched Drake and Josh, you watched iCarly. Like, that's the fundamental difference right now. That's it. It's only one generation gap. It's not too crazy. We don't have to bring Victorious into the mix yet.
If you're cool enough, you watch both Drake and Josh and iCarly.
Look,
and maybe you listen to the iCarly theme song while you're doing the dishes sometimes. I don't know, maybe not me, but somebody on this podcast.
Would point out I had a little brother too, so I got like the peak end of it. And I mean, look, swipe or no swiping, oh man. But this is how you know we're hitting towards midnight here. And so, yeah.
I mean, you can't bring up, well, first of all, you can't bring up Dora the Explorer without me telling this live studio audience that I did get a call back to be Boots. When I was 8 years old, I auditioned for the role. I didn't get it. Probably because I corrected the casting director when she got her lines wrong. No regrets, but it almost happened. But anyway, any final thoughts from you?
So Hengist, so I got to study this Martina Hingis, Ashleigh Barty comparison. I need to find tape of that because I could see Dora. We got, Boots, get out of here, Boots. Or like this backpack was like, I feel like Boots was like, Dora. Again, if we weren't live, shut the F up, Dora. It's like, I'm sick of your nonsense. I'm done with this. Boots out. Yeah, it's like, why are we going to the tree? You know the tree. You just said on the map that the tree has the whatever. Anyways, we won't litigate that. But
anytime you people watch any of those clips or see a GIF, just imagine my voice coming.
Yeah, exactly.
And think of what could have been.
If you want to pivot to a week of like Ned's Declassified or Drake and Josh GIFs as opposed to Real Housewives, I think listeners of this live show would appreciate that. I think they'd be like, we get it.
I did. If you missed, I did like the Indian Wells to Miami transition, a clip from iCarly where she gets like zapped in the face with that like large, bright camera lens. Like it's been an aggressive turnaround, Indian Wells to Miami, and it's only gotten crazier with the announcement that our world number one is retiring.
Would you say Ben Rothenberg is the Megan of the tennis Twitter universe?
Aren't we all Megan? Oh, excuse me. Aren't we all Megan collectively watching his tweets like with the can of soda going, interesting?
Yeah, that's good. I'm trying to think. I forget what Josh's girlfriend's name. Mindy. I don't know. There's a fun lane for Mindy as well that I think would be a fun competition. Again, we'll save this for the full form pod. Not an emergency to do those comparisons. Ashleigh Barty retires Any final thoughts? Oh, Keith asked, which Dora character would Ashleigh Barty be? See, this is what we've inspired. I mean, she's the map. She's the map.
I was going to say, I think she's the map.
She's the map.
She had a plan. She executed it. She followed it. And now she's done. I think she found the X.
He's the one who needs to know. He's the map. He's the map. He's the map. Yeah. That's a good one. I would agree with you. Who's Dora? I mean, how many WTA players would lay claim to being Dora? AKA main character energy. Andrescu like immediately is Dora. Like, come on.
I was gonna say Kostyuk, incidentally. So
yeah.
Like we touched down on that friend group almost immediately, whether it's Andrescu, Potapova, Marta Kostyuk. They got their backpack on and they are ready to get out of here.
That's us landing the plane of this emergency podcast perfectly. Well, with all that said, David, are you be writing about this for tennis.com? Who got the assignment?
We got a flash news up on tennis.com. I'm sure Steve Tigner and or Joel Drucker have some phenomenal takes that I look forward to reading over the next couple of days. So you can stay tuned for that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to that. What about you? What's your Miami coverage? I know we talked about this, but I always want to hear what's up.
I'm hoping to do some live blogs. I think if we can get an Osaka Kerber second round, I think I'll probably be live blogging that. I want to be in the present after doing so much reflection and looking back. I want to just kind of be in the moment for the next couple of weeks before we turn to clay. So I think I'll be doing some of that if I can help it.
Yeah. Well, again, we look forward to those live blogs. I'm sure I will have you back on the podcast in the next week, as well as who knows, maybe we get our next retirement. Okay. Who's no, I was gonna say who's the next big star to retire, but yeah,
me.
Yeah, exactly. So Ashleigh Barty's younger than I am. Like that doesn't feel good. It's
time for me to pull. It's time for one of us to pull focus on this podcast and announce our retirement immediately.
Is this an excuse? Do we get to do it? Westhoff, put up the graphic. Tennis podcaster Alex Gruskin announces his retirement after 15,000 episodes. No, we're not even in it. We're just scratching the surface. We're not hanging it. We're Serena. There's 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. We still got some time to go, David.
We're Gael Monfils. We're going to be here for another 15 years, entertaining you every step of the way.
I'm Roger Federer. I don't have a knee. It's gone. I'm just holding on for dear life at this point. No, with all that said, again, you can read all of his work, tennis.com. You can find him on tennis Twitter. If you're watching this, we appreciate all of you who tuned in live. And again, to those of you who may have missed portions of this, jumped in late, you'll be able to hear the full pod on our mini break podcast feed. Maybe tonight, although super producer Daniel Westhoff has certainly earned some sleep. So if you'll cut him some slack, he'll probably end up doing that tomorrow morning. By the way, if you want to hear some final thoughts on Indian Wells, some thoughts on Miami from anyone on this stream, you can hear from both of us as David joined me on Monday to recap all things Indian Wells on the women's side, to talk about looking forward towards Miami. All those takes still hold up despite Ashleigh Barty retiring. So again, that podcast you can find on our website, crackrackets.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Shout out to super producer Daniel Westhoff, as always, heck of a job to do. And again, had this set up ready to go. I was like, can we go live? And he goes, can I get 12 minutes? And I go, you can have 15 if you need. And he goes, no, give me 12. And I was like, all right, that's more than enough. So a huge thank you to him. And yeah, again, a huge thank you to you, David. I saw that felt like what's it called when you, it was a passive aggressive, but you're like trying to, what's that called on Twitter when you're like trying to send a message?
It was a Batman light in the sky. It was for one of my three caballeros to take me up on the offer.
I'm glad you brought that up. My first couple I actually was all in on is Superman and Lois Lane. And it's like, duh, that was number one for me. Bruce and Selena were close. Bruce and Talia Al Ghul, the real one will know, daughter of Ra's al Ghul. That's like for the cartoon slappies like myself. That was another little, she calls him her beloved. That was always funny to me. We're not going to do that here now, though. We will save all of that for the Batman podcast. So with that said, for our fantastic co-host here tonight, David Kane, our super producer, Daniel Westhoff, our friends at Tennis Point, whose support allows us to do things like these emergency podcasts, tennis-point.com. The promo code is CR15. And from all of us here at both Crack Rackets and the Tennis Channel Podcast Network, I'm your host, Alex Gruskin. David, what do we tell our listeners?
And that's the Barty.
I'll allow it. And we will see you all tomorrow. Thank you as always, David.
Thank you.